Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Author Friendship Circle writing seminar. I'm SorynStudios, author of the Omni Mage, and the host for today's seminar on high fantasy. Joining me today are fellow authors Nagillian,
Hello.
the Shing Pen,
Hello, everyone.
Miss Reality Bites,
Hello.
and Scully.
Hello.
Now, before we get into specifically discussing high fantasy, let's first take a look at the fantasy genre itself. It's a rather vague genre comprising of many subgenres. Some of those subgenres even have subgenres of themselves. The fantasy subgenres I'll be discussing today are high, low, epic, sword and sorcery, heroic, dark, and grimdark. While I do recognize that there are many other subgenres of fantasy, these are the main ones I'll be discussing during the seminar. First thing I will mention is that you can actually have a singular novel that falls under either high or low fantasy, or neither actually, and contains some of the other subgenres mentioned as well. However, your novel cannot be both high and low fantasy. So, what's the difference between the two? The fundamental difference between them is their setting. Low fantasy takes place on Earth in some form or another, whereas high fantasy takes place on a completely fictional world of your own creation. Low fantasy is typically more about realism with little reliance on magic. High fantasy worlds are steeped in magic, and it changes many facets of how the world works. Now, some people believe that epic fantasy and high fantasy are the same thing. While very similar, the major difference between the two is that epic fantasy focuses more on the scope and scale of the story, and often entails conflicts that threaten the entire world or universe. They usually have an extremely large cast of characters to complement the rich, detailed world you create. High fantasy focuses more on the characters themselves, rather than the epic scale of events that occur. It focuses on how your characters deal with the events as they unfold. Now, it's quite common to combine these two, which is why they are often confused. However, it's easily possible to have a high fantasy that is not an epic fantasy, and vice versa. Next, we have sword and sorcery and heroic fantasy, which are often, but not always, subgenres of other fantasy subgenres. Heroic fantasy is typically an action-adventure that normally follows a hero who may or may not have supporting characters to help them along the way. It fits somewhere between high and low fantasy, with the scale not as grand, and maybe not focusing entirely on the hero's personal goals. Then we have sword and sorcery. A good example is the Conan the Barbarian series. They are typically much less developed than heroic fantasies, and lead toward more exotic descriptions to keep the reader's attention instead. The protagonists are usually morally gray compared to heroic fantasy, where the main character must be morally good. While heroic fantasy can fall under epic, high, or low fantasy, sword and sorcery novels are typically less than epic, and rarely high fantasy because of their lesser developed nature. But they do line up well with low fantasy. Personally, I'm not a big fan of sword or sorcery or low fantasy, but that's just me. Next, we get into grimdark and dark fantasy. Dark fantasy's main defining attribute is its gloomy atmosphere. It typically includes a gothic type of horror written without purposely intending to scare the reader, but rather explores the dark and frightening side of our nature, psychology, and the uncanny. Good doesn't always win, and the main characters themselves aren't always good. In dark fantasy, there will probably be plenty of themes that will be bleak, pessimistic, gritty, and or graphic in nature. Nagillian, seeing as you're the author of an ongoing dark fantasy novel, could you please tell us a bit more about the genre?
Well, one way that I definitely like to describe dark fantasy as is when someone dies, they die. And as people hearing this might think, well, of course when someone died, they die. But in very light fantasies or fantasies you see everywhere, especially in modern days, when someone dies, it's almost as if they just brush it off and then continue forward. There's not really the psychological trauma, the pain, the feeling of nearly puking upon seeing just someone they know die in front of them. And even if you are an enemy of that person dying, you still feel the trauma of, oh, a life was just taken. And then furthermore, if you are a battle-worn warrior, even if someone dies and you're used to it, there's still the really dark and grim aspect of, oh, I'm supposed to feel something here, but I'm not feeling something. Really plays on the psychological themes of everything. It's just full of melancholic feelings. It's really grim and depressing. Especially with, as people might know, the battle of white versus black, like the good and the evil. Here in Dark Fantasy, you don't really play with that. You play with which one is the darkest of the grays. Everything is grey, there's no good, there's no evil. There's just which one is just darker than the other. And that's just a fight of who is actually the evil one here, who's actually the one who's in the wrong. And that also plays into, for example, which side you're on, which perspective you're on. So just plays a lot with everything is dark, something happens, everyone feels it, and it's not a positive experience.
Alright, thank you for that. Next, we have Grimdark, which is sometimes a subgenre of dark fantasy, but it is more of a violent genre that explores the idea that the actions of a single person can't do much to improve the declining world. That inertia, possibly from evil forces and or temptation, will inevitably ensure everyone's doom. The best you can hope for is a struggle with morally ambiguous heroes to oppose certain forces and maybe rescue some people, giving them a brief respite before it all ends for everyone. Basically, even in its brightest moments, it's still depressing as hell. While you can have a dark, high, or epic fantasy, you cannot have a grimdark epic or high fantasy, simply because the forces of evil have basically won, and your characters are just trying to survive until the end. Now, let's go back to exploring high fantasy, which will also include epic fantasy because of how closely related they are. But first, let me blow your mind for a second. To Tolkien's own admission, Middle-earth is an old version of our own Earth. Technically speaking, this makes it a low fantasy, not a high fantasy. Shocking, right? But given the scope of the world, and how different it is than our own, and that it's steeped in magic, I mean, come on. The story centers on a magical ring, there are magical swords, and you have a wizard who reincarnates. The distinct races also lend more towards high fantasy, so fear not, one minor technicality won't change its status as the father of high fantasy. However, it does go to show just how fuzzy these genre definitions can really be. Now, what do you need for high fantasy? You need an invented world, and you need to establish its rules. While you can do that as your story progresses, it's a great idea to plan all this out in advance so you don't create plot holes. I think any author worth their salt will have a map of their world. It helps you as an author remember where everything is, how far apart things are, and where the different factions or races reside across your land. Your readers need to feel like the world exists and be able to picture it in their minds. You also need some type of magic system. However, I'll put a pin in that for the moment, and we'll get back to that as is extremely important. But you also need central conflict. Now, it might not be apparent from the beginning, but there needs to be some greater evil in the world. You may only start with a representative of that evil, but if you are incorporating epic fantasy, like most high fantasy does, it'll have to be something world-changing, such as Taravangian from the Stormlight Archive, or the Dark One, Shaitan, in The Wheel of Time, or Sauron from The Lord of the Rings. Something on that scale. And also, while it's common to create new races, or use existing tropes such as dwarves or elves, having non-human races is not a prerequisite for epic or high fantasy. The Lightbringer saga is a prime example of this and sticks to plain old humans and doesn't rely on other races to add a fantasy element to their story. That said, I've created numerous races for the Omni Mage because it suited my world, not because I thought it needed it as part of the genre. Next, obviously, you need characters. It's high fantasy. Start with your main character. Most high fantasy series have a coming-of-age type of theme for the main character, but that's not needed. You just need to make sure that the character can develop as the story unfolds, and work towards fighting the great evil. You likely need a romantic interest, or several, and companions that join and support your main character. It's here that I strongly recommend thinking about using multiple POVs. This is a personal preference of mine. Using a system of different POVs allows your readers to explore the depth of your characters, their own personal motivations, thought processes, and helps to develop your world as you write through their eyes and show your readers how they perceive the world that you've crafted for them. In the Omni Mage, I currently have 22 unique points of view. I know some of you are like, whoa, that's a lot. But take a look at the Wheel of Time series. It has 147 unique points of view. And yes, some of you might say, but Soren, that's over the entire series of 14 books. And you're right. However, let me point out to you that some of the individual novels from that series have nearly 50 unique points of view. And it's those varying points of view that allow the author to show all aspects of the world with different perspectives, each giving the reader a new piece of literary treasure. With all that being said, it doesn't mean every named character needs a POV either. If they can shed light on something you need the reader to know, it's worth it. If you need the reader to know intimate details about something going on where the main character isn't located, you probably need a POV for that too. Some POVs might be one-offs, and they're only there to serve a very specific purpose. But you'll have others that your readers will get to know intimately and grow attached to as they follow each of their intertwining stories. For added depth, you can also give characters regional accents reflected in their dialogue. I'll get into dialogue in a little bit, but the dynamics between your characters is extremely important in high fantasy. Make them all connected in one way or another. Weave a tapestry of characters who are anywhere from heroic to evil, making sure you have plenty of gray characters in the middle. Your characters don't want predictability. They want to be surprised by your character's actions. And by all means, feel free to change how the reader sees your characters. For example, I have a mentally unstable serial killer who kills people because the voices in his head tell him to. However, as his story progressed, the readers are made to feel sorry for him. They might not like him, but he has depth and internal struggles and his own motivations. He's no longer a simple antagonist, as he tries to fight against the voices controlling him. Also, before you go killing off a character, make sure the reader actually cares if they die, especially a POV character. If you've done your job well as an author, this won't be an issue. Lastly, for POVs, make sure to monitor your pacing. It can sometimes be a daunting task when you've had several POVs, all with their own events going on at the same time that you need to cover. And now that we got the basics of characters down, let's get back to that pinned topic, magic. The first thing you want to figure out is what type of magic system you want to exist in your world. Now, I'm not talking about system as in system novel, which is the topic of our last seminar, but more of how magic works in your novel. There are two main types of magic systems. You have hard magic and soft magic. Hard magic follows a strict set of rules and limitations. You should never break the rules you set without a very good reason and a proper explanation, or your readers may hate you for it. A good example of hard magic is the allomancy system used in the Mistborn series, which uses the ingestion of minerals to enable magic. As the body consumes those minerals through normal life and the use of magic that relies on them, the caster needs to replenish them in order to continue using magic. It works almost like chemistry with a magical flair, but the rules are hard and set in stone. Soft magic has little to no set rules, much like the magic used in Lord of the Rings. With soft magic, pretty much anything can happen if you let it. My novel uses a hard magic system, however, I have not explained all the rules to the reader yet. There are a few minor soft elements to it, such as the ability to craft new runes that may have effects that have never been seen before. However, the risk of making such things is extremely high. If you're unsure how to craft a magic system, I highly recommend checking out some of Brandon Sanderson's lectures on the topic, as he's well known as the magic system guru. We may have a seminar on that topic in the future if there's demand for it. So, fellow hosts, can you think of some great magic systems that you've read about in the past?
So I've read this series a long time ago, about 15 years ago, by Trudy Carnarvon. I can't pronounce the last name. And it's called The Magician's Guild. And there's got a few books in the series, and she's got a second series on the same one. And I remember when I first read that, how I was really impressed. And the magic system, when I read the magic system, I didn't know anything about hard or soft magic systems, and it just wowed me. I was just really intrigued more by the magic system than the actual story. And the way she delivered that was she had the main character go to a magician's guild. So, like, Harry Potter goes to first year at Hogwarts. So the main character was going to a magician's guild, and you were learning the magic system as the main character was learning the magic system and what they could and could not do. And the thing with something you mentioned about hard magic systems, what I think about hard magic systems is they're like physics, except they have their own rules and laws. So if you think about physics, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. It's the same thing when you have a hard magic system. And something else I thought of too is often when I read web novel stories or web serial stories and people have their own magic systems, if you don't plan it out before you start properly, if you don't plan out a progression, the most important thing is not just a system but a progression for you, especially if you've got a few characters who are getting more powerful. What can happen is they can get overpowered too quickly and it can ruin your story. And all of a sudden, instead of having these little fights, they're throwing these fireballs that can destroy planets, and it's just no fun at all.
Yep, I definitely understand what you're talking about there. So anybody else have anything to add to that?
No, I'm here to learn. Just kidding. I'm not great at high fantasy and stuff, but I love it. And whenever I'm writing something, I always put fantasy elements into it. And right now, like Scully said, if you want to write, magic system and etc., you have to prepare from the beginning before you even start the story, maybe, because then you can smooth out the progression. That's something that I struggle doing because I'm a pantser, like 98%. So it's hard because I have this story, I have everything planned out, but the thing is, for your information, so I'm writing this book. It's not high fantasy, but it's not also located on Earth. So it started on Earth, but actually the main character is a long lost princess from another planet, and in this planet they have magic and science live side by side. So they have space exploration, etc., but also mage that can control elements and stuff. And so because I have the story, I have the plot and everything, I lack is the world building. This is something that I'm struggling with, and this is my problem, because I have the story, but I'm not good at those system magic and etc., because I'm not you guys. Probably I don't even read what you read. So it's just that I have this story, but unfortunately there are some magical elements into it, because that's what is required. So I'm struggling to make it. But I agree with Scully. Again, you have to plan this out, but it's also not impossible to go as you write. This is what I'm doing right now, and sometimes looking back, I would be like, oh wow, what that, Ah, wow, but it's a lot of work. Wish I can spend. And this is also the reality bites, that's my name. This is the bad thing is, I love this story and I believe I can do so much more with this. I can work on the better world building. No, like right now, better, I mean like faster. I can write uh, a good world. I put my heart into it, but the problem is this book doesn't make money, so I don't have the time to dedicate to make this story, to give this story what it deserves, a good world building. So if I want to do it right, for your information, this story is like 1.5 years old and only 500,000 words in, while my other book, 6 months old, already 500,000, because it makes money. So I can focus my time, to just write in that one. So this is also a problem with writers, to it making money or making art. So yeah, just sharing.
Yeah, I
We're talking
completely
about
understand.
system and etc. You're right. So I wish I can do decent work with this, not like right now, because I want to do it right. I only publish like 1 or 2 chapters per week because I want to do it right. because I don't have time to put into this work. But if I did, I can write like, one chapter a day and make it really nice, good quality and stuff. But now if I want to stay in that quality lane, I can only do it like once a week. Oh yeah. Quality bites, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And you're right, pouncing is quite hard when you're doing high fantasy because of how in depth everything is and everything you need to keep. You need to remember everything. Otherwise, you're going to be creating plot holes. Which I'll get into that in a little bit. Anyway, there's another thing I need to bring up, which is a common issue with high fantasy. Because of how vast the world is and how fantastical it can be, info dumps tend to be commonplace. You should try your best to avoid info dumping on your readers and just give relevant information as it's needed. I know in your first chapters some level of dumping may be required, but try to make sure it's kept to a minimum or you'll lose your readers, especially on a web novel type platform. Try to convey the info through the actions of your characters if you can. I came from a traditional novel mindset to web novel and have learned to adapt my writing accordingly, trying to keep the best of both traditional and web novel practices so that my novel can bridge the gap between the two. Does anyone have any thoughts on ways to adapt a normal traditional writing style of high fantasy for a serialized novel?
Well, I did start writing Breaking Worlds, and maybe if you know, like the way that I talked about the way I've structured, outlined, and everything, I do see it, or did see it as doing a traditional publishing. Everything arc-wise would just be one large chapter, and then from there on, I just decided, hey, instead of just having 5 or 6 large chapters in traditional publishing, I would instead just take each small point, each section that will be happening in those large chapters, and then minimize it. So I would start with, for example, what do I want to, like the starting scene, okay? Is the starting scene going to be too long for me to do in one serialized published chapter in web novel style? Yes, it is. Okay, then how and which point can I then divide it to have like small cliffhangers on the way as well? Because with web novel, having cliffhangers at the ends of every small chapter you have can be really powerful, honestly.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
as you might know now, the style and the writing my novel is heavily in the serialized web novel style because most of it, which isn't web novel style wise, but I'm still doing season published novels. So I'm gonna do like whole seasons that's gonna be published, a little break in a whole another season. Also because I'm gonna have music, graphic, audiobook, artworks, and everything for each season. I do need that break. But yeah.
Yeah, completely understand. Seasons are basically like the web novel equivalent to volumes. So,
Say something?
oh, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, because I before I wrote in web novel, I never wrote long novels, and I wrote like in traditional way, long chapters and etc. But after I found out, oh, this is how they do it, I started doing it. And I have a tip for people who wants to try to change their way of writing into web novel type of writing, serialized and etc. Of course, one, we already know that chapters are short and you have to have cliffhangers and etc. A good way to help you with that is just write your book like the way you would normally write it. Like if it's gonna be like in a novel, everything is very detailed. Like one day, you explain everything. You go deep into stuff. Like while in traditional book, things can be this is not important. You just skip and then go next into the next chapter, etc. And one book consists of only like 50,000 words or 100,000 max. If it's hard for you to it, and you would just see, okay, and then you divide the story that you already write, like for example, okay, chapter 1, 5,000 words. You take it and then you see it, you read it, and then you rewrite it, like editing your first manuscript. Because after you see it, you're like, oh, okay, I can add more details on this dialogue, I can add details on this and this, and you know Next thing you know, suddenly the 5,000 manuscript has become like 10,000 or 15,000 because you add things into it, you make things more detailed. I think that the most visible difference between traditional manuscript and web novel type of manuscript is that, with web novel, you tend to be, writing in details about stuff, instead of writing one chapter about how the man and the woman meet. You write like 5 chapters, like how, when, what happened at that time, and what conversation they have, and etc. Everything becomes more detailed. So just write everything like you normally write, and then after that you go back to it. As you read, you add it and add some more, add some more, add some more, and some more, and voila, suddenly it's like a lot more words than before.
Yes, I completely understand that, and that is one of the reasons why your high fantasy novels are typically some of the longest novels of all novels. They ranging usually at the small side for a good high fantasy series at 400,000 words, upwards of over 800,000 words. That can be quite common for the genre, and then having multiple books in the series. So you kind of look at it like that. There's also the fact that the way I personally approached the transition was I started to realize that web novel writing in that format, I looked at it like a soap opera. I mentioned this before in the first seminar, but I'll just bring it up again. You look at it, how soap operas work. Every episode, if you think about it, there's not actually a whole lot that goes on in each episode. But there's always this cliffhanger that comes at the end, and there's always a beginning, middle, and end to it. So you just have to write in those little bite-sized portions like a soap opera that just goes on every day for years and years and years. So that is how you eventually progress to those epic length novels where you've got millions of words by the end of it, which is what I'm planning on doing. I've set a goal for myself to actually surpass the Wheel of Time's word count of 4.4 million words. It is a very lofty goal that will take me years to complete, but I know I have the story to do it. I might not have the money-making ability with that story because of the genre and it being on web novel, which isn't really known for Western high fantasy. It's not one of the popular genres on the platform. But I don't care. The novel is a passion project for me. So I want it to keep going, and it just will. I've gone currently at 140 or 141 days consecutive publishing now. And I just, every day, without fail, I make sure I get that chapter out. But next, I would like to touch briefly on the importance of world building, which was briefly mentioned earlier. I won't go into detail, as that will be for other seminars to cover. It's a massive topic that could span several seminars, to be honest. I just want to state how imperative it is that if you are writing an epic high fantasy, that you make your world feel alive and real. If you can't accomplish that, you really need to wait until we have a seminar on world building when we go into it, or read up on it online. Honestly, I would love to host a workshop on the topic, but considering how vast it is, it would take far more time than we have today. However, there is a veritable cornucopia of information on the subject out there if you just search for it. Some of what I'll cover shortly will fall under world building as well. But next, let's actually talk more about writing high fantasy. The most important first step you can actually take is reading high fantasy. Do your research on novels in the genre, which pretty much goes for writing any genre. Examine the settings, the character development, the world's internal logic, including the magic systems they use. I've mentioned a handful of novels during my talk, and I recommend reading them all, particularly The Wheel of Time, if you want to study on multiple POVs and the sheer scope of its world. George R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series handles it a bit differently, but it's still another prominent example despite my dislike of his writing style. Also, please check out the first Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson and the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks for some excellent hard magic systems. For soft magic, There's, of course, Lord of the Rings, and also A Song of Fire and Ice, or Ice and Fire. But also, I need to mention the Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson for soft magic. It's an excellent series you should all read, especially if you're interested in high fantasy. Next, we'll go back to the setting aspect, and how important it is that your fictional world has a strong sense of place. If the reader can't picture the character's environment, then your novel may feel a bit hollow or dry. Giving detail to your world is as important as the characters themselves, showing the contrast between them, with different landscapes, atmospheres, and how they change over time as your novel progresses. This will allow your readers to feel like the world is real. Next, we'll discuss high fantasy cliches and tropes. Lovers of the genre will likely come to expect certain tropes in your novel. However, it's important to incorporate original ideas or your readers will put you down for the lack of original content. Mythical creatures such as dragons, for example, are commonly used in high fantasy novels. It doesn't mean you can't use them as well, but try to break free of the stereotypical molds and do something different with them. Try to subvert the reader's expectations and create a strong sense of your world as a distinct place, not a collection of cookie-cutter ideas thrown together. Now, this goes for all your characters as well. You need to make sure they are complex and diverse. Lesser fantasy novels often rely on obvious traits that are tied to class, race, or social bearing. Of course, the warrior is brave. Of course, the princess or elf is graceful or chaste. In real life, people are often surprise us by holding contradictory beliefs or behaving differently to how stereotyping would let us to assume. The warrior who tears into battle might run bellowing from a snake or a rat in reality. No one is consistent all the time. In high fantasy novels, characters surprise not only each other, but themselves too. Start by figuring out what your character wants, what your character needs, your character's personality traits, how your character thinks, how your character feels, what big events are in your character's life and backstory, and how do they mold them, your character's quirks. Physical appearance questions can come next. Explore their body as if you were a scientist examining a new species. Jot down every detail and speculate every scar or other feature you give them. For example, in my novel, The Omni Mage starts with Allura, a teenage girl who is missing her left arm. Now you're wondering, what happened? Why is she missing that arm? She's missing her arm because of a failed magical experiment she did when she was younger. But that's not really why she's missing her arm. Allura's missing her arm because I want her to have that struggle in life. Kind of makes me a dick, doesn't it? But that struggle is important and plays a big part in who she is and who she'll become. She has other physical traits and behaviors that also make her stand out from the crowd, and it's those kinds of things that will make your readers attached to your characters. Going back to tropes and cliches, can any of my fellow hosts here name some good examples of tropes and cliches that are overdone but that you've seen refreshed in a new way?
Well, maybe the antagonist is always the first thing that comes out of their mouth when they meet the protagonist is always negative. They're always unlikable. So it's very rare that you have an antagonist that is likable. Like I think the Black Panther, where the antagonist was a killer. I forget his name, Killer something. He was actually quite likable. I actually liked the antagonist in that story. He had a good reason for doing what he was doing.
Right.
But what I wanted to talk about too is what you mentioned before about when you're playing the character traits and everything. This is something I learned from Brandon Sanderson actually. The most important thing when you're creating a character is their flaws or flaw, singular.
Yes.
It's the one thing the reader remembers the most. It's everyone should have a flaw. No one's perfect. And it's how you make them very distinctive. Like, as you said, the missing arm, what you were doing there was creating a flaw for your main character. But I have flaws for all my characters. They all have flaws. And they can be simple. They don't need to be spectacular, like having a missing arm. They could be just, they have a very narrow point of view on something. Or they're just, what's the word for it? I don't know, they can't swim. Just little things. It could be anything, really.
It's a great point and a very true statement. She's not even the main character. She's, she is in the very beginning, but I'm not going to get into spoilers there. But yes, flaws are definitely important. You want your characters to feel real, like people, like normal people. No one's perfect, and if they are, well, then we obviously haven't dug far enough to see what their flaw is.
I think, by the way, like giving him, like you had mentioned, like giving them like a specific and like even a small kind of thing that may look small, like we have discussed in the past, like creating characters and and we have created characters with suggestions of others. And one character that you have mentioned before, the serial killer in a sense, who is listening voice. I think, like,
yes,
this is a
Rudiger.
common thing, but it is like a common thing also to at some point, like he's a bad guy, but at some point, like you realize, like, is he really the bad guy, or he's just a victim himself, or having like the, you mentioned, like the princess who may be like the spoiled brat that later seems to become like, yeah, maybe she can say, maybe it's gonna be something more. And like a character that you have, like we had discussed, and like giving an accent to the character, which is hard to do in the writing, but you have actually had succeeded in a very good way. Is bringing like the character to have like its own separation from others, and even the way that they dressed or things like that, maybe have like the unique thing, like wearing glasses. It's something like in a fantasy thing, like, okay, like it's not like a common thing maybe, but in magic, yeah, creating glasses maybe not that good, but do they need glasses, or they wear it for style or whatever? Is a common
Right.
thing to,
Yes.
so but yeah, also like in mine, even if my thing isn't like quite high fantasy or fantasy, like I try to think of a way, like when introducing new characters, even if it is like for the chapter, like creating like a goblin that is a gatekeeper in the next floor that they're going. Like I try to give them, like in my mind, having like a background of themselves, and maybe having like some kind of, like, even just a name, to be like giving an elven like name to a goblin that gives you like why that could be. It may be something that could be brought later, but it also adds a little more to the reader thinking of, there are many things that happen, like not all the goblins are goblins, not all the elves are elves, not all the dwarves are dwarves. There are things that may have led to a different way, and like the possibilities are endless.
Absolutely. You got to take that. I mean, you might have a dwarf, but just turn it on its head and make him different. Make him.
I
not
literally have a dwarf who is pretty much reincarnation of a half orc, so he pretty much like meets the main character, and he's the main character hears his name and has like he's using like his clan name as a half orc, and the character recognizes that, and he actually speaks Orcish at him, and he responds back, but he's like a dead sword big dwarf, and then he's hearing him speaking like this Orcish kind of language, which is the language is having like, they are very deep, both of them, but it's, they have like, both of these races may have like deep voices, but you definitely can tell like the Orcish probably is a little more darkish kind of language, forbidden kind of language to be here, while the orc, while the dwarf being like a little more weight, like not normal, be like but yeah. I always try to find like generators for languages, especially to get like a feeling of how that could be, because especially like people like talking over there who have started like creating their own languages, and many people have started like making their own. There are many things that helps you to get like a better feeling when you create a new races, or like characters in races that exist, or races that you have created, but you may have based them to something.
Right. Now, that brings up an excellent point. The language. That is a major difference between traditional and web novel practices. Where you have
Okay.
invented languages. That is very frowned upon from what basically I was told, that readers aren't really into that as far as web novels go. Whereas in traditional novels, they're much more appreciated.
Yeah,
Uh,
I try like my character when he speaks like in different languages. I pretty much have like the translation of it. I'm not actually writing, even if I could probably like write it in that language and in that other language. But yeah, it's probably gonna be weird for the audience of the web novel to read it that way.
did you have something to add, Miss Reality Bites?
Yeah. I'm very interested in, using trope characters and then give them flaws to make it fresh. So I actually have, I do that a lot. And one of the characters that I really like, handsome man. I'm not gonna lie about it. So in my books, usually I have like gorgeous man. Like that's why women they love reading my books. Anyway, so I have this this character. He's like, imagine Legolas, like the handsome elf, like he's a good archer and everything, but I make him dumb. So he's a narrow-minded guy, sometimes not really dumb, but he's slow. So you can see like in a glance he's like this amazing looking guy, and he's like with his arrow and stuff and bow and etc. When he opened his mouth, like he would say some stupid things, like when his friend uh got to see his baby for the first time, and everyone was like, ooh, oh my god, how cute. He was like, he tilted his head trying to see how beautiful is the baby, that everyone was ing. And then he looked and, oh, these people blind, this baby is ugly, like. But he didn't say it, openly, otherwise he would get punched. And yeah, like, so it's refreshing, even though he's handsome, he's awesome, and he's a good warrior, but I make him dumb, and it becomes funny, becomes
Yeah.
refreshing. Yeah. And like another example is that, the king, the male lead, he was forced hunt down his wife because the woman was framed for killing her mother-in-law. So the king was forced by his father and everyone, you have to find her, you have to kill her, blah blah blah. And it was like, I don't believe she killed my mom, but yeah, to please everyone, he set a bounty for her head, like 1,000 gold coins. And when his friend came, the stupid handsome guy, is that, if you don't believe your wife is the killer, why are you setting up bounty for her, 1,000 gold coins? And it's like, because I've sent other people to do secret mission. So these people, I send them to spread news underground that a mysterious client will pay them 50,000 gold coins if they can bring my wife alive. So that means he's paying the whole world actually to protect the women, because any sane man would prefer to get 50,000 gold coins if they can bring her alive, instead of, killing her to get 1,000 coins. His friend was like, oh, so
Okay.
another person is willing to pay 50,000 gold coins for your wife? And it's like, that other person is me. So he has to explain it to his friend. Yeah. So yeah. It's just an example of how we can use flaws and not rehash. I think recreating a typical character, but make them new or make them different.
I think, by the way, like something that Mr. Reality Bites mentioned, which goes back to the world building, is to think like what the economy system, like something that you probably need to think, because yeah, like you may say like 50,000 coins, but what a gold coin, what it does represent. So people like have to keep in mind something like that.
Yes. Obviously, the value of currency would have to be established in your world, and you'd have to make it clear that it's a large sum or a small sum. Obviously, from the way she was talking, it's quite a large sum. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Next, as we talked about, or Miss Reality Bites mentioned pantsing a bit earlier, I'm the first to admit that I'm a bit of a pantser when it comes to writing the Omni Mage. However, I'm also a huge advocate of plotting and planning. While I may not have a massive outline detailing the rest of my novel, I do still have major events that are planned. The destination is clear, but the journey to that destination is what's fuzzy and made up as I go. That being said, I take many notes after I write each chapter, summarizing what I've written into a blurb and adding details to documents, keeping track of it all. You'll likely have a large cast of characters that you need to keep track of, and details for each one. Also, all the details of your world's lore. Lore is integral, and any slip up there could create plot holes. Keep all that history safe and organized. You'll likely have quite an extensive list of locations, shop names, inns, and other details that you may need again later. Other races and creatures, if you have any, also need proper descriptions. I don't just mean physical. Make sure you know what makes them tick and makes them worthy of a place in your world. If you're just starting out, I highly recommend using Scrivener to keep everything organized and easily accessible. There's a free trial of Scrivener if you want to check it out. However, if your budget is tight or you want something more old school, simple notepad files or Word documents can work too, if you keep them organized and name them properly for easy access later. Now, going back to creatures, dark fantasy is usually ripe with fantastical and often horrific creatures. Nagillian, can you tell us a bit about your creation process there?
Yeah, as some of you guys listening might know, I create quite a varied amount of original creatures and monsters for my worlds, and I've been doing so ever since 2016 when I started as a creative. But the way that I would like to start off when I make a monster is often thinking what place in the world, society, or just purpose do they have? For example, a rather unique kind of species that I've made in a world called King's Vessel for a game I worked on is, I don't have a name for them yet, but we called them the Bone Tribe. Essentially, the whole aspect of them was that there was a war. Giants was being felled in what became a dark forest that became dark because thousands upon thousands of giants were killed and just left there to waste. So the forest just took the life and carcasses of these monsters and then built itself up to become quite dark and grim in itself. But from within that, a new species rose up, and that was the species of the Bone Tribe, which has a special, really heavy front-heavy gorilla type of build, but also slightly lizard folk, basically just growing from these small ashes and bones that were left. They learned that in order to fight and to survive in this dark forest that was being created from this battle, they will need a power of their own. And from that they learned how to mend the bones, how to make the bones that they were being risen up from as a species become a power and a weapon for them. And that way I decided to make a whole society, like how would they use these bones, how would a ritual come out from it? For example, choose like a birthing bone that would be the very core of their power to symbolize and be an extension of themselves. And then from there on, okay, so this is how they fight, how would the society work, how would the whole area that they came to life in work, and then slowly create basically your whole own society and your whole species out from that. Then of course when you go for how they look like, it's just a matter of what you like to see them as. I like to see them as quite front-heavy lizard folk that just are fighting mostly for brute force, but there's still some that can attack through archery or assassination. Another species that I've made is, I call them imps, but they're basically, the heads are that of skulls, like just of bone, with the slits, like the opening for their eyes, is just a fiery fire that protrudes from the inside. And the way that they came from, like as a species, like from birth, essentially, they are from their mother. when she has like cubs, so like for example 3 of them to 6, but they will grow out of her bones. Like they will from within, their heads will be affixed to her bones from it within, and then come to life and then grow out like fruits essentially from inside of the body of the mother. And then at the end, when they are primed to be birthed, they basically just rip themselves out of the body of the mother, killing her in the process. So in that way that she would, like they, as a species, they come to life, I was thinking, how would I describe the blood red goal that is that birth? And with that, it is a quite elongated skull they have, where their fur and their bodies are basically also of bone. Like their tail is basically a whole spinal cord just extending off in the tail. It's just a bone, it's nothing more. And their fur, which they have, which is the only non-bone thing on their bodies, is blood red, to symbolize that they came out of death from the mother. And they're basically wearing the color of the mother's blood with them along the way.
Yep, and that's a dark fantasy author for you.
That's dark fantasy. Yeah. That's just what I do.
I think like something that we have discussed in the past, like personally we have mentioned, it is a thing like when you're creating like a monster by yourself, is also like the name, because like when, like I said, like when you hear like an imp, many people may have like different kind of thing depending, like if they are like playing D&D, they may have like the image how they are there, if they do that and that, and then so when you use like a specific one, like you have to completely like give them the idea and explain to them like how much different like this is. And of course Nagi, as he has done right now, he has done a great job of describing the difference of like how he's imp with possible other imps in different kind of books, games, or whatever is different on what separates them. So I think like if you create something else, either you need to give like a name that is original, or if you use a name that may not be that original, to decide what the separations may be and give like your own touches over there, and giving like a background of like the way of creating is that's why he looks like that is probably like a good way to think about that.
Yes, and creating creatures also includes races. Obviously, with a fantasy race of sentient people, you have to give a lot more to the creation process. But the creatures in themselves still need quite a bit of information and reason for being in your world, and obviously original appearances as well. Does anybody else have anything else to add for that?
By the way, you ask for us to check on the chat in case people have questions. Almost forget that. So there is a question here from Afan. He asked about, I wonder which one is better, making a completely new high fantasy world from scratch or just modify an already well-known one. I think because, we're talking about new races, language, world building, etc. This would be a good question to,
For using a world that's already well known, I mean, this is kind of for the Q&A section, but might as well answer it now.
Sorry.
It's all right. Basically, for high fantasy, it needs to be a completely invented world. I mean, you can use somebody else's world, but to me, that's kind of like cheating. You can do it, but I mean, who created that world? Can you actually use it, and is it okay to use it? Or are you just writing a fan fiction in their world? There's a lot of things there, and obviously if it takes place on Earth, it's technically not high fantasy. It's low fantasy.
There's something to be said for inspiration, though. So you could take elements that you love from different sources and maybe put a little bit of spin on them to make them your own. So you don't have to invent everything from scratch. I'll give you an example, which ties into you're talking about races. I've got elves in my story, and they're not your generic elves. So I bring what I do is I bring in tropes and then I turn the tropes on their head. So what I did is I looked at Tolkien and I researched where he got his inspirations from, and he got it from Beowulf and the Eddas written by Story, a Viking who lived about 900 years ago, and then I went to those and I saw what their names were and what they were a little bit about. There was not a lot of information on it, but what I did then is I made Sabat Alfar, Merc Alfar, and Doc Alfar, and then I said, okay, the Sabat Alfar, and I sort of made them like wood elves. They lived in the forest. They were very ruthless, and they were very like they would be more like an animal as far as like a tiger. Okay, if I'm hungry, I'll kill this thing, but I don't feel guilty about killing it, and I eat it. And you know, but then they'll protect the forest. So they're very wood elfy. And then I had the Merc Alfar, which were a little bit like dark elves, but I put a spin on it, and they're very magical. And then I had the Doc Alfar, which were the most original, and the reader will think, oh, they're going to be dwarves. They're going to be dwarves. But then when they actually meet them, they got dark skin and they wear goggles because they're underground all the time. So they're a little bit of a mix between a dwarf and a gnome and a mole person, and they craft stuff like dwarves. But you know, they don't look and think like dwarves. They don't have beards and things like that. So what I did is I took the stuff I loved in there, and then I put my own spin on it. So that's a way you can create a high fantasy world without having to think of everything original yourself. Just take elements of things you love, put a bit of spin on it, make it your own, and then those building blocks come together and can be your own high fantasy world.
Yes, well done. That is exactly what you want to do. Obviously, we're going to draw on inspiration, whether it's subconscious or not. We're influenced by everything in the world. Everything you've read is going to influence you in some way or another. If you're creating a high fantasy, odds are you've already read some high fantasy and you like aspects of it. And you might have a particular novel which you kind of might borrow small traits from. In the beginning of my novel, I pay homage to Robert Jordan, the author of The Wheel of Time. Just a small little paragraph where it's an obvious homage, but it's still making it my own, but you can tell that that's where it kind of originated from, just as in a simple little introduction. Next, we're going to get into dialogue. We briefly mentioned this with the Sheng Pen, where I've created a character who had basically I had him create a character for me because I was putting friends and things into the novel. I was letting my friends make characters for themselves. Either I made it for them or I let them choose certain aspects. He requested that his character spoke with a French accent and wore a hat. So I made that happen. So I actually took a part of my world, which I hadn't developed yet, but it still existed, and created basically a dialect for that region of the world. So now everyone in that, because of him, everyone in that region now speaks with a French accent. But yes, let's get into other things. When you're writing dialogue, especially between members of different civilizations in your fantasy world, remember that how people express themselves conveys something about their nature. Use sayings and manners of speech to strengthen the reader's sense of your characters' common attributes as well as differences. Try to use action wherever possible to advance the plot, and keep lengthy conversations as breathers between sections where there is great tension. We can all be guilty of not adhering to this at times, and that's okay as long as your story is engaging and keeps moving forward. It might be more dramatic character development in your dialogue rather than action. But sometimes characters just, talk. The dialogue lets your reader get a better sense of who they are when combined with your narration. As I mentioned earlier, using different dialogue styles is a great way to add depth to a character and let the reader know more about them without having to actually explain it. For example, Lord of the Rings, when Frodo's friend Sam is caught overhearing an important conversation, he says, "I wasn't dropping no eaves, sir." His speech is reflective of the Hobbit's rural and plain-talking qualities. Compare this to the lyrical and flowing speech of the elves. When a white horse appears, Legolas says, "That is one of the Miras, unless my eyes are cheated by some spell." The elves tend to use passive voice, and more complex forms of tense, setting them apart from the other races. Moving on, I'll cover naming. While you may be inclined to invent strange, fantastical names, as a general rule of thumb, try to create names that readers shouldn't have trouble pronouncing. In the Ursi novels, the protagonist isn't called Tir Agnankan or Ananaxian. He's simply called Ged. It's still an uncommon name, and the simplicity fits the style of the story. High fantasy is epic in scope and typically has a large cast of characters. Think about how you can use names to convey aspects of your characters. This will help keep them memorable. In Lord of the Rings, for example, Sam's simple, familiar name, abbreviated from Samwise, suits his easygoing and dependable nature. Compare this to the arcane-sounding name of the fallen, corrupted wizard, Saruman. You can obviously see the contrast there. Now, Nagillian also loves to do this. He will research and go into different languages that suit the race or where the character's from and choose names that way. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about your process there?
Yeah, sure. So one way that I do it in particular is that I like to refer to languages and origins from our own world. So what purpose and from what origin does the character, the creature, or whatever I do have? Is it more Egyptian? Then I take further from Arabic cultures and everything, just play around with how their soundings are actually being portrayed in the language and then try to create my own thing there. But since most of the things I'm doing are more Germanic or English based, especially because I have something like a Wendigo, I would go more into Anglo-Saxon and actually create my own species names. I have, for example, because everyone knows giant spiders. I have giant spiders in my own thing. But what are the names of the spiders? Are just like giant spiders, and then you go on from there. I decided to
Bob.
give them, yeah. um, I like to just because I'm also going for more of a bone themes. Like I love bones and love skulls, and I want to focus on that with the spiders as well. So for that, I went into just getting my own name for them. And what I basically did was I went to a translator from Anglo-Saxon to modern English and just did a few words, like what reminds me of these spiders. So it's a demon, it's a spider, it's web, chaotic in a sense, it's frightening. And I took those words and then combined them. And the end, and then I got Wengus, which has a weird pronunciation, but like written wise it looks rather nice. And that then became the name for my giant spiders, because of a combination of demon spider webs, I think. I did just those three words and then combined them together and then got my own name, which fits the origin of the whole area and everything they're in, because I chose, again, the more Germanic English-based environment.
I must say, like in my case, because like the main book that I write, because it is like a video game world, so pretty much like the players like have like an usernames. I don't go with Dragon Killer 420 or something like that. Give them like actually normal kind of names, but they have like a meaning behind it. Either it's like a personality thing or not. And like I have named like two brothers who are actually is the word translating in Japanese, and it's like Hineko and Miss Hineko, I believe, and it is like fire god and water god, I believe, and like the Miss Hineko, which is the water god. The reason is that because he is a mage and he's actually using like the water, specializing in the water element, although so it is like almost a little thing about me, like on the way that they want to progress in the game, like they have put in like in the character on the name the character, because they have the option of naming their own characters. And yeah, I try to, like, especially like in the players' names, to give them like this kind of thing. Like, I named the rogue a character who likes to make deals and things like that. It's just named him Price, because you like gonna make everyone pay the price to him and things like that. So I think it is like a very strong thing, like just a simple name. It's a simple, like, giving a name to something, to even give them of like what the persona, like being a representation of what the personality going to be, or like either they are or they're gonna be.
Yeah, and like Scully messaged in the chat, fantasynamegenerators.com is a brilliant place to go if you're having trouble naming. They have names for so many different types of things, and you can try to draw your inspiration from there, or just use one of the generated names. There's just
Yeah.
so much there for so many different things that you could need naming for. It's ridiculous, including real world names.
Yeah, I always like, I use that every now and then for like characters who, but try to like to keep like use it as inspiration, if not like just using it for it's a nerd kind of name that I got
Yeah.
with it. But yeah, it's a great tour, and we probably would go that where we go like for the seminar for the word reading, but there are like a lot of tours online or Node that can help you in that. And
Yes, absolutely.
I've got 2 cents on this one too, Soren. With naming characters, I try not to name a character unless they're important, unless they're going to be hanging around. So it might be, I'll give them their role, their job, like the miller, the baker, the guardsman, the captain. So if they're not hanging around for long, I won't give them a name, because the readers can't remember all the names of all the characters I have already. And so, as you said before, I've got a huge document of all the magic system names, all the substances and everything to
Yes.
make for crafting and everything. But another thing I do is, because my characters are, one of the things I'm always trying to do when I'm writing is I want to immerse the readers in the world. I want them to feel like they're in the world. So I try not to do things that pull them out of the world, which are things like asides and things like that. So I'm always trying to keep them in the world. And one of the things I do is, because the characters are exploring a new area or a new part of the world, they'll come across a creature or monster, and I'll describe what it looks like. Then they'll fight it because it's aggressive, and they have to fight it, and they'll work out what
Right,
its
of
strengths and
course.
weaknesses are that they're fighting it. But they don't know what it's called. They don't know what its name is.
Exactly.
So they just make up a name. They just call it, the big lizard thingy or something, whatever the characters decide to call it. So I'm not monster. The characters are, and it's not technically its name. Like, they'll know things like, that's a sort of a troll. And so then they just say, this is a forest troll, this is a cave troll, or this is a mount. So there are things like that. But then, when they come across the lizard thing, they'll just make it up based on what it looks like.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine, and that is normal. Like, that's what you would do if you come across some creature you've never seen before, and you have no idea what the hell it is. You're just gonna say whatever pops into mind for what it looks like.
yeah, and also like the thing is, like, even like for the names of actual people, like, you're not like, it's not gonna be like realistic in a sense of like going, like the character goes to a new town and has to go through the guard. The guard is not gonna say, "Oh, hello, I'm Guard William. Welcome to our town. How can I serve you?" No, he's just gonna do the inspection and then let him go.
Right. There are
Yeah,
some
like-
cases where they might introduce themselves, but yeah, overall, they're not going to just come out with their name if they don't need to.
Yeah, it's not gonna be like everyone is gonna be introducing themselves to the main character just by saying this.
Exactly. And odds are the main character really doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, most of the times. I'm here to cure the wizard that you have problem with. Just let me go in.
Yep, I'm gonna kill you. I don't know what your name is, but I don't really care because you're gonna be dead. And we're moving on. So, basically, Writing high fantasy is challenging because of the scope and creation and invention it requires. Provided that you plan ahead, spend some time coming up with particulars on how your world works, and avoid the pitfalls of common genre cliches, you can write a high fantasy novel that makes readers reluctant to leave your fictional world. So, moving on, does anyone have anything that they would like to ask in regards to high fantasy? This will be the Q&A section. So the chat, go ahead and ask whatever questions you'd like to
I
ask.
think I had seen like I think it was like a general question, but I think like it is interesting. Like, is it okay to I can't find the person that asked it, but if it's okay to self-insert yourself like in your book?
Ooh, it is okay. It is perfectly fine to do that. And
It
odds
depends
are,
on
as a
the
writer, you're going to put yourself into one of your characters one way or another. But to fully put yourself in there, you could leave yourself open to a lot of judgment if you can handle it and you have thick skin like you should as an author. But yeah, people might look at you, the author, differently based on how you portray your character in the novel.
Yeah.
The one who asked it, by the way, was Lico, I believe, Lico. So it's a fun.
Okay.
Yeah. To add to that, so for my character Mika, as some of you might know, I do torment him with all types of mental trauma. And in regards to that, even though it's not exactly the same thing he goes through that I've gone through, especially like I'm in a sense putting him through what I've been through in my own life. And the way that I'm writing him is because I see myself like as Soren knows and probably Xing as well. I've told them I've gone through quite a hell in my life. And what I do is I see myself as a warrior. Like I've come out of it all stronger. But I'm writing Mika as a yes, he's getting stronger, but what he's going through is actually destroying him and breaking him down. So that's a way where I use something of myself and what I've been through to write and progress my story, but just in a different way.
Right.
I think that's the best way to answer that question is put a little bit of yourself in your characters and stuff that you know, but don't like to say don't do anything, but in this instance, I think don't put yourself in the story. Put yourself in the character. Put yourself in the character.
I mean, even like I think like even subconsciously, you're gonna put like yourself or like others that you know in the characters in the book. But yeah, like don't try to like completely like make your own character like be you. Yeah, on the part of it, yeah, probably is like the best. And I personally have actually given like the name that I'm using like in online like to the main character, which I must say like I'm regretting. But he's nothing like me. He's like personality wise and like way of acting and things like that. Like the name is the only thing that we are using in common. But yeah.
Yeah, I definitely would not want to put my name into my novel, or myself into the novel. I might put little aspects into certain characters, but that's as close as I'll get.
Yeah, same. I mean, I would put like some views, some background, some aspects of myself in different characters, not in solely in the main character or whatever. But yeah, I put a little bit of things that I believed in or things that, for example, like resilience or certain characters and etc. But not of one single character would be taken from me. And if readers ask me in a comment like, is this character inspired by you? I would be horrified. It's just me. I don't want to share that much about myself to the world. That's just me. But everyone writes differently. They have basically just everyone is different. But if it's me, I would never put me in my books. It's I don't want to share that much.
I mean, like some that we have mentioned, like in the in this seminar, is like what Soren has done when he asked me and others like to make characters. Like and he's actually and I doing the same thing every now and then. We are using like aspect of those characters of the people that are based off, but they are not like exactly them. Mostly because we don't know each other that well, because we are only like talking through the online platform. But we, of course, like giving um, our own touch to that. Like,
Yes. Plus, I like being able to just play with your characters and just make you do whatever I want.
the puppet master.
Yes. So, all right. Then I guess I'll wrap it up here. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed the seminar. I'm not exactly sure what the next seminar is going to be. If you have any light to shed on that, Nagi?
I'm planning for the next one to be sci-fi. I will
Sci-fi,
talk to Soren
brilliant.
about that. Yeah.
That'll be fun. So I hope you guys all can tune into that. We'll announce that when we have more information. Thank you all for listening, and hope you guys have a great day.
Bye-bye. Was fun.
Bye.
Bye bye. It was great. Thank you so much. And I learned so much. So thank you, Sorin, for the sharing.
My
Bye,
pleasure.
everyone.